What's up, gentlemen? This is Rising Phoenix Podcast, a podcast about how to rise up after your divorce. I'm your host, divorce coach Michael Rhodes. Let's get into it. Joining me today is Elaine Miller-Karas. She is the co-founder of the Trauma Resource Institute. Elaine, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Okay, well, I'm a social worker and I founded the Trauma Resource Institute. And also, I created two models of intervention, one called the community resiliency model, the other called the trauma resiliency model. And essentially, they're body-based interventions to help people heal after a traumatic experience. And I'm also a blogger on Psychology Today. I think that's how you found me. I
Yep.
also have a talk show called Resiliency Within on Voice America. I've published a book called Building Resiliency to Trauma, the community and trauma resiliency models. That's actually, I just published the second edition in March. So I do a lot of stuff, and some people call me a social entrepreneur. I think it's because I'm trying to change the world in positive ways. And I think you're trying to do that with Rising Phoenix too, from what I understand.
Yeah, I say that's pretty accurate. I'm going to throw a curveball because it just hit me. One of the things I like to do is define things. And I think it probably would make some sense if we define trauma. Everyone has sort of I know there's a clinical definition and everyone sort of has their own sort of way that they describe it, but how do you describe slash
Oh,
define trauma?
great, great question. Trauma is too much, too fast, or too long with things that may have happened to us in our life. It could be, for example, too much for too long could be child abuse.
Hmm.
Too much for too long could be a marriage that was not doing very well and you stayed in it too long. Too much too fast can be an earthquake. It can be, we've been having a lot of shootings in the United States, things that are unexpected. Um,
Hmm.
so that's kind of a simple
Sure.
definition, because what happens when we have those experiences, it dysregulates the nervous system. It bumps us out of our kind of zone of well-being. I call it the resilience zone. And it can actually bump us out for a long time before we can get back kind of steering the ship again of our own lives. But it also can be, there's been other ways it's been described: big T, little t, and C
Hmm.
trauma. So big T traumas are the huge things, right? The earthquakes, war. Little T traumas, and they're important to distinguish because, like, I had a terrible dentist when I was a kid. So I have to go to the dentist office. Now, my mother would go, "Oh, Elaine, don't be a wuss. They're just going to clean your teeth." But for me, it was kind of an existential moment. The dentist was mean, right?
Yeah.
So little T traumas are not it's not that it's a little T to the person, but people tend to marginalize
Sure.
those kinds of traumas like they're no big deal, but they could be a big deal for the person. And then C trauma is cumulative trauma. And that's an important distinction as well, because we have historical trauma. We have things that have happened to our communities that impact us in the present moment. And we have our own personal histories. And then we have all the things that happen to us in life that can kind of all, you know, get stuck together. And then sometimes it can be the smallest thing, like the straw that breaks the camel's back, that we can't function. We're going, gosh, I've been through so much. Why did this thing throw me off my game?
Yeah.
So that's kind of a simple way, I think, maybe a more conversational way to talk about trauma.
Yeah, no, it's excellent. And it's, not too, it doesn't stray too far from what we've talked about on this podcast before with other guests and stuff. But I think it's just important to sort of define things and understand them. And so, well, you can't understand it if you don't define it. So let's, on that sort of tip and on that definition sort of view, where I found you, like you said, psychologytoday.com, in your blog post, you talk about mindfulness, but with a trauma informed view. So let's first again define what is mindfulness.
Okay, and before I do that, I'm going to say one thing.
Sure.
All those adversities that you or I or any of your listeners may have happened does not define our future.
Sure.
Adversity is not our destiny. I like to say that.
Sure.
And so one of the, there's many healing practices that are under the kind of the large umbrella of a mindfulness practice. So I'm just going to give you the the clinical definition from the American Psychological Association, which they say, mindfulness is an awareness of one's internal states and surroundings. And so, what does that mean? Right?
Mhm.
It means being aware of the present moment, and that there's practices that you can do that helps you be aware of the present moment. Why is that important? Because when we have present moment awareness in not only our mind, but our body, our spirit, we're not thinking about the future. We're not thinking about the past. We can attend to what's happening to us in the here and now. And I think that's one of the most important things about mindfulness practices. And there's many kinds of interventions that have been created. There's say cognitive based mindfulness practices. There's mindfulness based stress reduction, mindfulness meditation. So when your listeners are thinking, oh, I do, I'm going to learn mindfulness, there's a lot out there. So to know that they're all not the same, and even each teacher might teach it a little bit differently, right? And so one of the things I've learned that's important about mindfulness practices, and one of the mindfulness practices that I created is called the community resiliency model. And what I learned about being trauma informed, which is so important, is that let's say that someone and you're having a bad day and they go, just breathe with me, breathe. And you're going, okay, but sometimes when people say that, it's not helpful. And so we can still get stuck in what we call the high zone or low zone because the breathing thing's not working for us. And also for some of us, when we bring attention to the breath, which is, it sounds like, it almost sounds like, how could that be since breath is life-giving? But the breath can be what's called a traumatic trigger.
Mm.
So it's not nourishing for us or settling. And that's when we say the trauma informed lens takes in account the things that have happened to us. And when a mindfulness practice is introduced, it's introduced with the idea of, let me see if I can have a gentler approach and give choice when I start a mindfulness practice.
Man, there's so much to this. It brings up so many questions. So,
Sure.
one of the things that I scribbled down was autopilot. How much of how many of us do you think are mindful, and how many of it? I know you can't give an exact number, but
Yeah, I don't have an exact number.
yeah, how much of the population, the general population, is on autopilot versus being mindful and being in the present? I think a large part of us live in the future or in the past.
I think we do. And I think so. So I don't have the number for you, but I could
Sure.
say that if we've had traumatic experiences, sometimes it's hard to be in the present moment. Even it's hard to be in the present moment, to experience our body as something that's our ally, that helps us to get through things, because our body might be connected to the traumas that we've had. And so sometimes people feel numb a lot of the time. And when we feel numb, we can go into what I call the low zone state. We can feel depressed, disconnected. And sometimes if we're there so long, we may develop conditions like a depressive disorder or an anxiety disorder. But I think the other thing that happens when we get into those low zone states is we can start to do adrenaline seeking behaviors. We
Mm,
can do risky things, or we can
sure.
start using too much alcohol or too many drugs
Sure.
to the point that we're not, showing up as our best self. And so then we can go into these high zone states, and then we only can stay there so long before we drop down into the low zone state again. We may not ever be in what I call the resilient zone, which is kind of like our wave of our vitality. It's like a zone of well-being. We can be sad in the resilient zone. We can even be a little bit angry, but we can handle our emotions in it. We can be calm, we can be happy, but the kind of resilient zone is not only a happy place. But so I think that, to, respond to your question, I think a lot of people go between these states and they're not mindful of the present moment. Like you're saying, they're in the future or in the past, and they can be very disconnected to the present because there's so many sensations of overwhelm that they deal with every single day.
Yeah. God, this stuff is so fascinating to me because I think this is the key when you're going through a divorce, especially when it's not wanted. When if you were left, it is a trauma. I don't care what anyone says. I'm sure you would agree. Anyone that I've
Yes.
had on here has said the same. So yes. So, um, okay. So let's talk about I'm not sure if I want to talk about triggers or if I want to talk about sort of, let's just focus on, I think we'll get to the mind body stuff, but let's focus on what does a person do if they have lived that trauma of divorce and they're, um, I don't know if we want to look at immediate weeks to months out or even years later. What does a person do to heal and move past that? How do you get through something that you have a very hard you got many triggers, from music to foods to restaurants that you drive by to your children that look potentially exactly like your spouse or your ex-spouse or whatever. Like, what does a person do to start moving forward after this sort of divorce trauma?
Well, I'd say the first thing, do you have a network of caring people around you? Is there somebody that you can talk to? Sometimes people do go to therapy for the first time, but therapists aren't for everyone. But
Mm.
I think having those kinds of people in your life that they gotcha.
Yeah.
They'll say, I'm so sorry this happened to you. If you need to talk to me, you come and they can sit with your pain with you. And
Mm.
so that you don't feel alone. Because I think what happens for many people in this situation is they feel really alone. What do they do? Where do they go? So trying to start building those relationships, or even sometimes reignite relationships, because
Yeah.
sometimes, if depending on the marriage, some partners are not very embracive of friendships,
Yeah.
and so that those friendships may have been severed, or at least they're weaker. So it's like, hey, I realize that things happened. I went down a trajectory with my ex that I really want to see if we can maybe start to talk again and be friends. And those people in your life,
Sure.
right? The ones that
Oh
have
yeah.
your back, right?
Yeah.
But maybe you have lost contact with them. So I think that's one of the ways to do it. But I do think that wellness practices actually can really be helpful. And so wellness practices are like, the mindfulness practices, but also going for a walk, being in nature, having those moments, let's say, especially with children, because children go through, of course, as you know, they go through divorce as well. And so, how do you create new memories with them that are about you being with them in a different way than they're used to being with their dad, right? So I think those things can be important because when we're thinking about another person, it's like we have resilient circuits in our brain. It's really exciting. Actually, I always get so excited when I know that we're designed for well-being.
Hmm.
How do you start creating pathways of well-being when you've gone through something traumatic? And one of those things is creating new memories with your kids, if you have
Hmm.
kids, or new memories with others.
Yeah.
And that doesn't mean, like we said, that those triggers don't happen, but it's like, how can you, there's concepts in neuroscience, they're called pruning and tuning. So tuning are tuning the new positive experiences in your life. And when you tune them, you not only think about them, but you try to sense them. So let's say that you like to go for walks in the countryside. And as you go for the walk in the countryside, you look around and you hear the birds, you see the beautiful landscape. Maybe there's the smell of sage or whatever smell that you like, right? And if you take a moment, and this is where mindfulness practices are helpful,
Hmm.
and you notice what's happening inside as you're having this nourishing experience. We call it resourcing. Then that's creating new pathways, right? And guess what happens? We're going to use the field as an example. So if you've ever been on a hike and you're on a certain pathway, there's usually a well-worn path. But
Hmm.
sometimes nearby there's a path that people aren't using as much. You can still see the outline, but it's not as traveled, right? Have you
Sure.
seen those kind of things?
Oh
Yeah.
yeah. Yep.
Yeah, so it's the same way is with our nervous system and with trauma. So if you decide that what you're going to pay attention to is all the betrayals
Mm.
of your ex, and that's what you're going to focus on, guess what you're doing with that well-worn pathway?
Yeah.
It's just getting deeper and deeper. And it's not just what you think, it's your whole body. You
Yeah.
can get tight in your body, your muscles tense, your belly may start to hurt. Lots of people start having physical pain, don't they, after a divorce?
Oh yeah.
Yeah. So when you think about it, right, it's like they're really traveling down that well-worn pathway. So pruning, what does pruning mean? Pruning means it's like that pathway that's disappearing. If you don't spend a lot of time with it, it starts to change,
Hmm.
right? So you can lose it. That would be good. So how do you create a new pathway? And remember that human beings, all of us, are designed for well-being. And sometimes people don't believe that, but it's true. Neuroscientists are proving that, right? There's something called neuroplasticity,
Hmm.
which means the brain can change. So as
Yep.
much as you're suffering right now, you don't have to suffer forever. And suffering's part of the human condition. But the way that we can mitigate, we can reduce suffering is by spending more time with those things that nourish us. And sometimes, honestly, this may sound simple for some people. Let's say that I'll tell you something about myself. I love to do dishes. I love the warm water on my hands. So, like, if I'm sometimes feeling like out of sorts, I'm going to go and do the dishes. I won't even put them in the dishwasher because I love to feel the sudsy water on my hands. And when I do that, I notice that I take a deeper breath, my muscles relax. I'm mindful of the present moment
Hmm.
in doing such a normal task of daily living. And so that's tuning my nervous system and creating a pathway of well being. So, what I would suggest to anyone who's suffering right now, even if it's the smallest thing, start doing little things, paying attention to what nourishes you. It could be washing the dishes. It could be mowing the lawn. It could be taking a shower.
Yeah.
Those kinds of things that provide nourishment from you. Pay attention to not just what you think, but what you sense.
Mhm.
Because part of the work that I've done in the world, and this is so important for your answer, there's something called interoceptive awareness. What does that mean? It means reading your nervous system. It's just like, your children and you learn to read when you were little, right? There's something called a growing body of evidence about body literacy, and that people who can pay attention to their sensations of well-being have better affect control and impulse control. So think about how important that is when you are moving through suffering after divorce, right? That if we can pay attention to those sensations of well-being, it changes us. Now, we already pay attention to sensations. For example, I don't know, where do you live?
Uh,
Do you
Pens-
live in
Pennsylvania.
Well, it's cold in Pennsylvania, right?
Oh yeah, it's freezing. That's why I
I
got this
think we
hat
just
on.
watched a football. Yes, it's very cold.
Yeah, yeah.
I live in California, right? So
Lucky you.
let's say, okay, let's say that you walk outside and it's 2 degrees below and you walk out with shorts and a t-shirt.
Mm.
What is your body going to tell you?
Well, you're freezing. Yeah, it's cold.
You're freezing. So you're going to be freezing ass cold. Okay, so then what are you going to do? Are you going to stay out there and just continue to be freezing ass cold?
No.
So what are you going to do?
You go in and bundle up or sit by the heater, fire, whatever. You would get out of that
So
situation.
Well, guess what? You just read your nervous system. So our nervous system is designed for us to pay attention to try to maintain balance. So
Mm.
when you walked out with this t-shirt, your nervous system was out of balance. So then you read your nervous system. I'm cold. Oh, go inside, put jacket on, right?
Yeah.
Then you can go back out again and you can be in a state of as much as you can be in balance with two
Right.
degrees. Oh, right. But you see what I'm saying?
Sure.
But that's true with everything that we do in life. So if we start to sense and pay attention to those sensations, so let's say, okay, every time I drop my kids off at my ex-wife's house, I can feel the tension in my arms as
Mm.
I'm holding the steering wheel. I can feel heat in my ears. I can feel my
Yes.
body getting tense. Okay, you know that, right?
Yes.
You're
Yes.
familiar with that. So
Yes.
that's like going outside without the jacket.
Mm.
So let's say, what can I do in order to, at this moment, to balance my nervous system? Now, some of the skills that I share with people all over the world are so simple, really. It can be as simple as I'm going to hold onto the steering wheel and feel the leather or the plastic in my hands. And I'm just going to notice me holding the steering wheel. I'm going to feel my butt in the chair of the cushion of the seat of my car. Okay, I can feel that. Now, when we do that, that's a form of mindfulness attention with our body in the present moment. And what tends to happen automatically is we take a deep breath. Now, I tend to ground with my hand because I'm on Zoom calls a lot. I have my talk show, blah, blah, blah. And if someone's like, I'm feeling that little tension of getting out of my zone of well-being, I'll just put my hand on the desk. And guess what happens? I've practiced it so many times. It's happening right now. I just took a breath. It's so automatic. I
Mm.
don't do it with intention. I do it because my body's used to, oh, she's settling right now. And that natural, spontaneous breath comes into the present moment. So I can't say enough how important it is for every one of your listeners who may be suffering right now to learn body literacy. I actually just wrote another piece on Psychology Today about body literacy that you can take a look at and share with your folks, because it talks a little bit about how you can go about doing that. And think about for children how
Mm,
important it is for kids. And I have to say, I've had the joy of taking this to kids around the world, and oh my gosh, it brings tears to my eyes, because
mm,
kids are pretty good at going, oh, when I'm not with daddy, I have something in my tummy. It hurts. It's something
yeah,
fuzzy and icky,
yeah,
right? So
yeah,
they're reading their nervous system.
yeah.
So then, what do you do when, you have to drop your kids off and you're not going to be with them all the time? You can actually help them saying, well, let's talk about what you and daddy like to do together. Okay, so when are we going to do that again? When you come back, we're going to go down, I know, whatever it might be, and we're going to go for that walk. Or you know what you do with between mommy's house and our house? You've got your teddy bear.
Yeah,
Let's talk about how you love your teddy bear. And then you're bringing that child to the present moment of their little transitional object that they take between the two houses, right?
yeah.
So sometimes some of the little interventions, and you may already do them naturally, are very simple. But if we as the adults are more mindful of that, that's also something that can help us when you say, well, how do we how do we deal with the trauma? I think the other part about it is, and I mean, you kind of alluded to this in the beginning, is that the divorce sometimes is the beginning of the trauma,
Mhm.
right? Because then it's like, if you have kids, how are we going to manage being the best parents for these kids, right? And you may be in the mindset that I want to be, because that mom is always going to be their mom.
Mhm.
And so how do I had a client once in my private practice that the 13-year-old was brought to me because she had told a friend she wanted to kill herself.
Mm.
So when I met with the parents, the father literally had on his ringtone when the mom would call, it was from the Wizard of Oz, ding dong, the witch is dead, which is pretty funny.
It
But
is, but
but
still.
but but what was it for the 13-year-old? For the
Yeah,
13-year-old, that was her
yeah,
mom.
yeah. You
She
can't
didn't
do
want her mom to die.
that.
And of course, we actually had a conversation about it.
Yeah,
And both of the parents wanted the best for their 13-year-old. They didn't
yeah.
want her to kill herself.
Sure.
And so a lot of the work I did, the 13-year-old was actually the symptom bearer of the family.
Yeah,
It was the parents that had to let go of some of their anger
yeah.
in order to be able to parent her. And you know what they did? Because they loved her very much. But the little girl, I'll never forget this. She said, because we talked about different ways that she could communicate with them. And I said, well, what about an email? She goes, well, one of them will get angry if I put the other one's name first. Can you imagine the pressure on the kid, right?
Yeah,
But we don't want to do that to kids. So it's like, but this is part of the answer to your question.
yeah,
It's not only the trauma of the divorce, but it's the trauma with the fallout, with the wake
yeah,
of the divorce, which can include children and friends, and who's going to keep the friends, right?
mm,
And that can be another betrayal. You thought somebody was your buddy, and all of a sudden they go with the wife and they don't go
yeah,
with you.
yeah,
It's like, so there's so many different avenues that where we can get touched. And so that's why one of the first things I said about call up those relationships with those people that have your back.
yeah. So I want to sort of kind of like give like a play by play, we'll say in a way, or an explanation as to why this is important, or even in some ways like the work that needs to be done. So we talked a lot. You talked a little bit about like the triggers essentially, right? Whether that be you know you lose that friend and then you see they pop on Facebook, or you drive by a restaurant that you used to go to, or you had to do drop offs, and so let's do the drop off thing, right? You have to drop off the kids. It's never fun. It's never been fun. I'm 4.5 years out from separation, and divorce was a year ago, so I'm okay, and I also understand, which I think is the sort of the point of all this, how to soothe myself, right? So I think so you drop off the kids, you notice what's going on. Obviously up here, this is immediate, right? This thing is this brain sometimes is a more trouble than it's worth, feels like sometimes, right? That's
Yeah,
it's our challenge, I think, right? And
right.
it's
It
so
is. Can be.
it's yeah, it's telling us, oh, this is depressing, this is sad, I hate that woman, or whatever. It's telling us all these things. We're upset, clearly, right? And so what we need to do at that point is listen to, drop into whatever nomenclature you want to use, but pay attention to your body, right? And I think the reason that we do this is so we can learn where we're affected in our body, and thus we can do things to soothe ourselves. So, you mentioned, I think, ears get hot, or there's a couple things you mentioned, but let's say it's
Right.
I don't know, you get a tightness in your chest, let's just say.
Okay.
Is the point, this is what I believe, this is what I teach guys that I work with, is the point not to then sort of massage that area, to drop into your body, to ultimately get out of fight or flight, freeze or fawn, whatever non prefrontal cortex situation is going on, right? Is it not the point to soothe yourself, to come back into your prefrontal cortex so you can calm down? Isn't that the reason why we're listening to our bodies?
Yes, you just said it really well. You've been well schooled. And so,
Yeah.
yes, because when we soothe ourselves, right, in whatever way that we're going to be talking, and why the sensory system is so important. And you mentioned it, is that we have our prefrontal cortex, right? That's like our executive team, right? Manages everything. But that executive team goes to lunch when our bodies get activated by a trigger, right?
Yeah.
It decides to say, I'm out of here, right?
Yeah.
Because the amygdala, which is our threat, I just love the amygdala because it's our threat detector. But that amygdala, which I call Amy G for short, right? Because Amy G has a suitcase of memories, right? She
Yeah.
remembers every good and bad thing that's happened to us. Why the restaurant that used to be beloved now is
Mm.
triggering us because it has a mixed bag, right? But it's in that suitcase. But so it's designed to remember the negative things that happened to us. And the best way and I talk about this in the article in Psychology Today, I love the concept of a memory capsule. Dr. Robert Scare, who passed a couple of years ago, is a lovely man. He was a neurologist. He was from Colorado.
Mm.
And he tried to make this simpler so people could understand. I just love this idea of a memory capsule. So think about this memory capsule is inside your body. It's dormant. And so then you're driving to your ex-wife's house, and all of a sudden, let's say, I don't know, let's say, what triggers you when you drive the kids? What's the thing that triggers you?
I think just making that last turn where
Okay,
I'm headed
so
to drop them off.
okay, and that's perfect. So you're making that last turn, which is really a body, your hands are on the wheel, you make the last turn, you see the house, and then pop. There is that memory capsule that's dormant inside, that all the ingredients of whatever's in there, and everybody has different ones, right? It could be tension, it can be being a little pissed off. Who knows? I'm not going to, you know what your memory capsule
Sure.
is, and people who are listening know what they are.
Sure.
So all of a sudden that's there. So if you say to that memory capsule, stop, memory capsule, I don't want you. Guess
Right.
what? You are using the language of the prefrontal cortex, and it's gone to lunch.
Mm.
So it's
Right,
not
right.
going to listen to you, right? They're out
Yeah.
to lunch.
Yeah.
So what you have to do then, you have to use the language of our survival brain, because the amygdala triggers, right? Our
Yeah.
survival brain to take action. And that's what's happening when you turn the corner and that pop happens, right? It's your survival.
Yeah.
So then you have to sense your body. That's where I said, notice your butt in the seat of the car. Notice your hands on the steering wheel. You might even want to, maybe the kids are in the back seat, and maybe you sing a song together, and
Mm.
you go, "Hey, let's sing Wheels on the Bus" as you're
Right.
turning the corner.
Right.
See, you're tuning a new pathway.
Mm.
So then what you're trying to do is you want to get that other pathway of the turn and seeing the house. You want it to be that light pathway in the field.
Mm.
And that's the way you do it, but it has to be sensory,
Mm.
because the thought alone isn't going to change the nervous system. And that's
Yeah.
why the body and body literacy is so important. Um, I think I have to say, I've been all over the world teaching these models and talking about this. And so many people have shared with me the degree of their suffering in the world.
Uh,
And they've tried so many different ways to get the prefrontal cortex, like you said, well, sometimes I don't like what it's saying to me, right?
right.
Well, because you're not talking to it, you think you are, but
Right.
it's gone to lunch. But if you all of a sudden sense your body
Yeah.
and you notice what's happening in the present moment, then that can shift you. And sometimes the interventions, we have what I call help now to reset now strategies. And oh, they're so simple. Kids love them. Teachers love them to help with kids.
Mm.
And they're like, hey, if you find yourself getting bumped out, when you turn that corner, look straight ahead wherever you need to look and name the colors. Oh, look at
Mm.
there's green grass, there's a red building, there's a blue car. when you're doing that, you're occupying your brain in a different way, and it oftentimes will bring the activation down
Yeah.
and soothe yourself, is your words, right? And soothe the nervous system. So by the time you get to the front door, you don't go, here,
Right.
here's the kids, right?
Right.
Okay, see you in a couple days, right? Because that's
Yeah.
what you want to model to your children.
Yeah.
Because if you're in that high zone or even the low zone and disconnected, it's not good for your kids because you're the tuning fork for your children.
Yeah.
And so, as much as you can get into your zone by that sensory system or the help now strategies, the more that it can help you and your kids.
Yeah, I use that same. I tend to get anxiety over the last year, which is rare for me. I've never been an anxious person, but the last year has really tested me because of all kinds of things, not just a divorce, more so my real job. And I've sort of developed this thing, which was just from people like yourself having conversations, and I do that where I pick four things that I can see and that I can hear and that I can feel, like I'll touch, my
Perfect.
jeans or it's
Yay.
yeah, it brings you back to baseline, I guess. I mean, I think is that the app
Yeah, I think
description?
we call you can call it what you want, really. We call it the resilience zone.
Mm.
And I also want to tell you, I have a free app that people can
Oh,
download.
cool.
It's called I Chill. Isn't that good? I Chill.
I like it.
Yeah, it's available in smartphones, and so it goes through the model that I've been sharing with you. It actually also shows you some graphics of how I describe the zones, and it's my voice in English. It's also in Spanish and Ukrainian. That's I have a big project in Ukraine helping
Uh,
Ukrainian teachers. So we were able to get a
sense.
funder to do
Nice.
so if anybody's listening in Ukrainian, you can also listen to it in Ukrainian. But I think the important thing is that the iChill app has been really important for people because it's a way you can practice, you can listen to it while you're in the car. Like
Yeah.
when you're, driving to pick your wife up, pick your wife up, drop the children off.
Right.
So those kinds of things can be helpful. So iChill is the name of it. And if you have a smartphone, and if you don't have a smartphone, we have a website. It's called ichillapp.com.
Okay. So I want to continue on this path of talking about, paying attention to your body. Isn't it also advantageous because when you start learning your body, you can know when you've been triggered without knowing you've been triggered, if that makes sense. So I want to kind of talk about that a little bit. And I think that's helpful because sometimes we get in these states of mind and we don't know why, right? We're just all of a sudden we're cranky or we're very sad and we don't really understand why. But I think if we learn to listen to our body, it can give us clues as to, what's going on. So how much of our triggers are unconscious versus conscious?
Well, that's a really great question. So remember that amygdala is designed to remember all the negative things that happen to us. And with trauma is not always remembered as a narrative story or experience that we can call it up and say, oh yeah, I remember the time that I was chased by a bear at Yosemite. We may not have that memory because
Mm,
we saw the bear, we just started running, and we may only have fragments of the narrative memory. It's called explicit memory.
mm,
So explicit memory is factual memory. It's autobiographical memory. It will say, oh, last year my divorce was final on April 8th, whatever that may be.
right.
But there's something else called implicit memory, which is body memory. And this is really the answer to your question. So when trauma is experienced, it can be held in the body. There's actually books that have been written about it. The Body Bears the Burden by Bessel van der Kolk. I have a book, it's called Building Resiliency to Trauma, where we have a really good chapter on these body memories that happen. And so when they happen, like let's say I'm going to give you another example. Let's say you're in the grocery store and you got a full cart of stuff and somebody walks by you that's the perfume that your wife always wore.
Mm.
And all of a sudden you're tense, you're angry, and you're going, you say fuck on your
Oh
thing. I
yeah,
can
yeah,
use
you can curse. Yeah,
I don't
absolutely.
say that on mine, but I can say it here.
Oh
Fuck,
yeah,
I
you
love
can.
that word. Yeah. I say fork a lot in exchange, after seeing anyway. But you go, I am pissed off.
Yeah,
And you don't know why you're pissed off. But now you're going through getting, the stuff. Maybe you're more irritable towards the kids, but you have no idea.
yeah.
So basically, you're having a physical reaction,
Mhm.
okay, but you don't know why. So if you're having the physical reaction and you read your nervous system and you're bumped out of your resilient zone, you can like hold on to the cart. Start talking to your kids, and maybe your nervous system will come back into balance again. But it may take a little bit more than that. You may need to look around and saying, oh, look at that nice, look at all the different choices we have for apples today, and you're naming the red apples, right?
Right, right.
But then all of a sudden you stop and going, oh, I get it. I smell the perfume, but it may not be known to you right away.
Yeah.
Because remember that the amygdala is designed to keep you safe.
Mm,
We are um, so kind of we're so amazing in this way.
mhm,
We are designed for survival, and we're designed to really automatically take action when something is threatening to us. But if the amygdala, if we remembered everything that threatened to, it would be too much for our explicit memory. So the body memory holds it in those memory capsules. So the memory capsule has that memory of the smell, but what used to be a nourishing smell is now a traumatic smell.
mm.
And your body reacts, but you don't necessarily connect the fact that it was your ex-wife's perfume until you really later start thinking about it.
How?
Does that make sense what I'm saying,
Oh
right?
yeah, no, absolutely. It just made me think like, how hard is it to get this stuff, to practice this stuff, to heal? Like, I don't think you heal unless you learn these things, right? Maybe I'm wrong here, but I think these are absolutely necessary skills that you need, amongst I'm sure some others. But how hard is it to? I know that's sort of a nebulous question, but how
No,
hard
no,
is
but
it
I think
to
no, but
get
I
this stuff?
this is a really good question. I think it can be hard initially. It's like those triggers are, it's almost like you have a magnetic pull. If you ever put two magnets together and they just click like that, right?
Yep.
So you're trying to take that magnet away so it no longer has that same pull.
Mm,
And so, like with something like a smell, and this is important, what do we, so gosh, that smell, what if I, have to work next to somebody that they always wear that same perfume?
mm,
Does that mean I'm going to be pissed off all the time?
right.
So what we can do instead is we can think about, we don't even have to have the smell there. We can think about our favorite smell, and maybe it's the smell of lavender or lemon or whatever it may be. And we can call that up. I can actually smell lemon right now because I love lemons. I don't have a lemon with me, but I can,
Sure.
in my imaginal field, I can bring it up.
Sure.
So then I'm going to pair the lemon, smell the smell, ex-wife, smell lemon. The more that you pair that, you're creating that new pathway again. Now,
Mm,
it's not going to happen overnight, but it happens in time. I worked with a Iraq veteran who he was blown up in an IED explosion. A couple of his friends died,
mm,
sadly. And so every time that he went to get gas in his car and he smelled gasoline, what would happen to him? He'd
yeah.
go into a complete fear response.
Sure.
And so he learned over time that he actually had the essential oil of lavender in his car, that he would sniff it before he went and pumped gas. And over time, it was no longer as activating for him.
Oh,
But it
that's
took time. Does that make
fascinating.
sense?
Yeah,
Isn't
that's
that
fascinating.
fascinating, isn't it?
Okay, so let's talk about that in sort of more specific to divorce type of situation. We talked about dropping off the kids, but let's talk about messages. We get messages from, and I'm working with a guy on this right now. He gets triggered anytime he gets a message from his ex-wife. What can he do to navigate that trigger of every time a message pops up, he goes into flight mode or sometimes fight mode? What can he do to sort of start changing things?
Well, I think the message again. So instead of it being the perfume, it's the message.
Yeah.
And so then what he would have to do then is I often ask this question, what else is true? In that moment, where is he? Can he bring himself to the present moment away from the phone and the message?
Mm,
Maybe he's at a bowling alley. Maybe he's whatever he's doing.
yeah.
And like you say, like your strategies of touching something,
Yeah.
do something sensory to bring himself back into the present moment. Now, that doesn't mean that he doesn't want to throw the phone,
Right.
right? Because
Right.
he may want to do that, right?
Sure.
But you know what else you can do? You can imagine throwing the phone,
Mm,
because part of the models that have been created regarding completing survival responses, if you're stuck in it, is just allow your body to do what it wants to do.
mm,
So it may be just going like this with your arm, or maybe even faster, right?
mm,
I'm going to do it like this.
right.
Now, what I often suggest to people, if they have a lot of that anger in their system, and I don't know what his exact response is, I'd say stand up, go to the wall, and push against the wall with your might, like you're going to push the wall down. What happens then is that energy connected to the message is leaving his body,
Mm,
and then he's going to get back into his zone. And for some people, just thinking about the colors in the room is not going to be enough
yeah.
because the anger is so great against that ex-wife, that message, right? So doing something physical, because it's interesting, our arms and legs, when we move our arms and legs, it does something to our nervous system. So if we're in the high zone and we've gotten really pissed off, and let's say we do the opposite, we get really depressed and down, and we just don't even want to move out of our couch. Is that moving the body?
Mm,
It's like gasoline, positive energy
yeah.
to our nervous system that it can actually bring us back up to that zone of well-being if we're in low. It can also bring us back into the resilient zone if we go into high. So, so I would suggest him, if it's really big energy, stand up, push against the wall. If he doesn't like pushing his hands against the wall, some people don't. I've worked a lot with people that have been incarcerated, and they don't like to push their hands against the wall because it reminds them of being frisked. So
Yeah.
I say, well, what could you do that would be something similar? Okay, I can move my back against the wall and push against it. And so any way to move those large muscles, but also just, you know, get one of those punching bag things that you can put into your garage. And if you're feeling a lot of that energy, just go ahead and punch the bag. But the difference is, it's not just punching it fast, it's punching it so you can really sense that your body's completing a movement, so that your body releases the stuck energy that's connected to the energy of oftentimes anger that you may have towards the ex. It's going to
Yeah.
help you, and it's going to help your children, because then you won't be so angry around them when you have these things happen.
So, yeah, so let's focus in on anger, because I think for men, well, I don't think, I know for men, this is I also run a support group on Facebook with the help of some really, really great men. There's about 7,000 men in there, and I see anger pretty frequently. And for me, it's frustrating because I think mostly their anger it becomes their only tool in the tool bag, and that's all they lean on. That's all they use. It becomes extreme. Um, Okay, so if in terms of of dealing with the trauma, where does anger fit in there? And if you don't have any, should you have some, does it help you to recover? And if you have too much, does it hinder? Um, so let's talk about that. Let's talk about how anger and the healing of trauma intertwine.
Well, I think that anger can definitely is a part of trauma, but it also can be, if a person is disconnected, there's something that's called the freeze response. And I know that you probably talked about it on your show before, but sometimes, let's say that it was an unexpected divorce, and all of a sudden your wife, says, I'm done. I want to end it. And you're like, deer in the headlights.
Yes.
And at that moment, right, that's that what happened to you.
Oh yeah.
You're deer in the headlights, and it's like you almost can't speak,
Yeah.
because we can get scared, speechless, right? It's kind of, you're so scared because of what that means to you in your whole life. Your body responds to in that freeze response. Now, the freeze response, even though you can't do that, doesn't mean that you're not angry, but you may not be able to sense your anger, because you go into this protective mode of shock, and there are hormones that are released in your body so that you don't feel things as deeply.
Hmm.
And sometimes over time, when that, it's kind of like when we have something frozen in our freezer and we unthaw it. Over time, it changes in shape and it becomes softer, blah, blah, blah. So what happens with the freeze response in humans is, over time, we can start to defrost that freeze. And when that happens, we can start sensing the anger. And it can be surprising to us because we've been so kind of almost chilled to too much. But
Hmm.
then all of a sudden, there's the pop up of these sparks of anger that happen when we're thawing out.
Hmm.
So that can be part and parcel of the process for some people.
Hmm.
And I think that when we use the nervous system, I don't like the term fawn. I'll tell
Hmm.
you why, but I use tend and befriend rather than fawn. I actually wrote an article about it on Psychology Today. I'll send it to you.
Sure.
But tending and befriending, fight, flight, and freeze are the four responses, and
Hmm.
they're adaptive responses to
Hmm.
keep us alive.
Sure.
So, when I talk about tending and befriending, I'm saying more women do it than men, but men do it too. And it's when they oh, well, what can I do for you? Almost to the
Oh yeah.
extreme.
Yeah.
of helping someone or even the ex-wife to the point,
Oh yeah.
hey, buddy, what are you doing that for?
Yeah.
He's kicking you in the balls and you're going over there taking their casseroles. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah. Oh, I see that
That
too. Yeah. Yeah.
okay, but that's part of a survival response. And tending and befriending can be as much of a survival response as the fight response and the anger,
Mm,
and also the freeze response, which is a shock.
mm,
But remember that these survival responses are not a one-way ticket. There may be different ways that you experience it over time, depending on the situation that you're in.
mm,
Because sometimes tending and befriending an ex, okay, oh, you say you're going out with the new one. Oh, you're
mm.
gonna and you want me to watch the kids? Okay, I'll take the kids that weekend
Right.
because you know that tending and befriending is going to help you later, but it also helps your kids, right? That you're with your
Sure.
kids that way. So I don't look at survival responses as being bad.
Mm,
Now, if the anger is such that you're hurting yourself, you're hurting your children, you're threatening your wife, and we see every day in the
mm.
paper where someone's killed their wife, right?
Sadly, sadly, yeah.
That is what we don't want to happen.
Yeah.
So we have to have a way to discharge that extreme anger.
Yeah.
And some of that is working with your nervous system to release that anger that's in the body in a way that it's not going to harm yourself or others. Because, I've seen guys where they punch themselves, right? Or
Sure.
they punched holes in walls.
Yep.
We don't want that to happen to you. We don't want you to be hurt, or we don't want you to hurt your ex-wife or your kids. So allow that energy to come out, but in healthful ways. And that's where sometimes even just punching in the air, but slower, and
Mm,
noticing the punch without actually hurting someone, and just noticing the release. Now, what I would do when I had a private practice, when I would see that kind of anger in some men, and they'd always go, but Elaine, I might knock you over. I go, it's okay. I would hold up a pillow and
yeah.
let them just move into the pillow, right? But it's not just like uncontrolled, like cathartic, crazy hitting. It's like more controlled into the pillow so they could feel that there was someone pushing against it the other way, so they could feel the release. Because
Mm,
I don't ever want to convey to someone that I think it's okay to be violent. It
right.
is okay to get the energy out of your system.
Yeah.
And that's where there's more healthful, mindful ways to do that. I think that's why some people get involved in martial arts.
Sure.
And I would suggest that to a lot of the guys that are sitting there, I got all this pent up stuff. Get involved in, many of the martial arts, their ultimate goal was for peace,
Mm, very
right?
true. Yep.
And so some of those things can be very helpful. But I also want to say to them that because you may have these experiences of these survival responses, doesn't mean that there's anything wrong with you. It means that you're incredibly human.
Yeah.
And the discernment of, like, even listening to a podcast like this is what you decide to do differently to create a new pathway. Because sadly, there's some people that end up spending the rest of their life in jail because of this, right?
Yeah. Yeah. I don't have any interest
Or
in that.
worse.
Yeah. Or worse. Yeah. And so I think I get what I think one of the reasons I get frustrated when I see men lean on nothing but anger is I feel like it's they're behaving a bit like toddlers. It's because they don't have the skills to deal with the hurt. Isn't you talk about exhausting the energy. I always feel like that's important because it allows you to get underneath what's really fueling that anger, right? Isn't it really? Doesn't it boil down to your feelings or hurt or ashamed or whatever, like those
I
type
think,
of emotions?
yeah. Well, I think that it's, I look at it this way. I think about there's three doorways that we can use as humans for healing. One is we can say, well, how are you feeling about this? Now, you know that many men are not real good about talking about hurt,
Oh yeah,
that it's easier sometimes for them to talk about anger,
sure,
right? Not all, but I don't
sure.
want to overgeneralize.
No, I got you.
So we talk about feelings. It's important to get those feelings out. But what if you get those feelings out, but you still feel like shit,
Yeah.
right? Like, well, you said if I told you my feelings, I'd feel better, but I don't feel better.
Right, right.
So then, okay, so what's another doorway? Well, we can change our way of we think. Like, there's cognitive behavioral therapies where there's these thought records where you take a distorted thought and you try to create new thoughts, which
Yep,
has been helpful.
yep.
But when it's in the body in such an extreme way, I say, let's work with sensations,
Mm,
because that's a portal of intervention that most therapists don't know unless they're trained in the
mm,
trauma resiliency model, which I created, or somatic experiencing, or sensory motor psychotherapy. These are all body-based interventions, which I think can be really helpful
mm.
to complete the survival responses. Because what you're looking at, I hope maybe I'll give you a different framework about anger and, like getting frustrated, they're
Sure.
like toddlers. It's like because they're stuck,
Mm,
they aren't able to complete a process that is human. We didn't get so sophisticated until the last, 150 years or so.
right.
And so those responses of fight were very helpful for us to survive
Sure.
in situations that were more threatening. They don't work now,
Mm,
right? They don't work, but we have to still have a way to get rid of that, which is why the martial arts can be so great. But also having these kind of completing survival responses. If it was fight, if it was flight, if it's flight, notice your feet moving. I've seen so many people sometimes they're talking to me, well, I just want to get rid of the bitch. And I go, I notice your feet are moving. And I
right.
said, well, can you just notice your feet moving right now? And their feet will start to move. And then I said, just let them move the way they want to. And oftentimes I go, well, gosh, I'm actually feeling like I'm getting away from her or
Mm,
him or whoever it may be. Right. And so I said, well, just notice that sensation of getting away. And when you notice it and sense it, sometimes there's a lot of shaking that happens. Like, we have these even colloquialisms in the English language, shake it off, right? There's a reason for that, because when we shake it off, the nervous system is coming back into balance and some of that anger is leaving. So for some of your guys that have that a lot of that anger, I'd say teach them the pushing against the wall. Let them know that they can read some books about the body bears the burden,
mm.
and maybe even finding a somatic based therapist that might be able to help them. I'm sure there's some in
Oh,
Pennsylvania, but there's also a lot of people online now that
sure.
work in this way.
Yeah. So when you talk about it's I don't want to butcher your words, but I probably will. Not intentionally. It's
Okay.
about completing the process, right? So um what is that? So I guess that's the healing process, right? From trauma to healing, what I think. And then what does it look like, whether it's depression, sadness, or anger, you know, frustration? Like, am I am I making any kind of sense?
Well, no, I think you are, because I think, one of the things I've seen, and I think you were alluding to it, is that sometimes if we think about a coin and trauma being two sides of a coin, there can be grief and sadness and on one side and then anger on the other. I mean, it's more complicated than that.
Yeah.
But sometimes when there's a lot of suffering and grief that's not being able to be expressed, it gets wrapped into being really angry all the time.
Mm,
And so having avenues that you can express your sorrow. And I think what happens, and please correct me because you don't may not agree with me with this, is that I've seen with a lot of men that it can be not okay for them to express their feelings. They'd rather go to the gym and get
yeah.
it
Right.
out the way than talk about it,
Yep.
right?
Yep.
And so, but that doesn't mean that it may not be important. And when we talk about tears,
Mm,
now, there's a lot of research about tears now, and I
mm,
love the research. And some of the research that says that when you have emotional crying, it actually soothes the nervous system. That
mm,
oxytocin is released and endorphins are released in the body that actually comfort us.
yeah.
But if you as a man have been told your entire life to
Yeah.
suck it up, to don't cry, and so I imagine you already know this, but is to really encourage people to know about the research about it and saying, you know what, every now and then it's all right. I mean, you can do it in the bathroom, but
Yeah.
let the tears out and notice the tears.
Yeah.
Because when we notice the warmth of the tears and the wetness of the tears, it actually helps to embody the tears to release it.
Yeah.
So it doesn't get stuck in there.
Yeah.
And I have to say, I have one person that works with me in my organization, and he said, I've never cried so much since I met you. I said, well, and he's a big tough guy. I love him, right?
Yeah.
And he now cries on a regular basis. And he would, if he was sitting here with me, he'd say it changed him
Yeah.
to be
Well,
able to do that,
yeah,
right?
and I think, and that's the process, right? Like, or how do you can you complete the process? I guess we're talking about healing here, right? Without crying, without feeling the underlying emotions that fuel this anger. Like, isn't that, like, don't you have to feel those feelings and emotions rather than just be pissed off all the time?
I think that if you're pissed off all the time, that you need to find some kind of way to to release the tension that's in the body. It's not good for you. It's not good for your nervous system. It's not good for your long-term health. I mean, that's where the cortisol levels, right?
Sure.
That, they're only supposed to be there for short acting, but if they're there all the time, that it depletes your immune system, which is
Mm.
why people can get sick and be susceptible to all sorts of chronic illnesses, chronic pain, et cetera, et cetera. So having a mechanism to release that is very important. But I don't want anyone to think that it's easy to do that.
Oh, no, 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 no,
Because,
no, definitely
yeah,
not.
because it's not. And also, it's also because the injury doesn't stop, especially as
Yes.
long as you have kids.
Yeah, yeah.
Because as long as
True.
you have kids, I remember my next door neighbor when she divorced her husband, she said, I never realized that when we got divorced that I would be divorced to him for the rest of my life.
Yeah,
And so
yeah.
that means college graduation, high school
Oh, yeah.
graduation, weddings, all those things that you have to deal with so that it's not over, which is why it's so important to start reading your nervous system, because it's like you give yourself the antidote when you are able to, like that metaphor that we used about going outside in the cold in Pennsylvania and then putting the coat
Right.
on.
Right.
But if you continue not to know where that coat is in your life when it's anger, then you're going to be someone who's going to be living in a lot of rage. And that's not going to be good for you or anybody else that's in your life, or creating a new life for yourself with a new partner. You know, how many times have you seen
Oh,
guys
yeah.
repeat sometimes the same mistakes? It's just a different woman with a different face. I had a friend that
Yeah.
was married 5 times. I said, baby, don't marry the next one.
Yeah.
Just kind of test it out for a while, right?
Yeah.
But I mean, I think that's what happens. And so, but I guess I think what's important for people to know is that there's hope,
Sure.
that they don't have to be stuck in that,
No.
that there's ways. It may take them some energy and time. I would really suggest that they listen to the iChill app
Mm.
and they remember their body. Their body's important in a healthy way.
Yeah.
And it's not just for sex, right?
Right.
Because,
Right.
because that's the other thing, sex can be a relief.
Sure.
And so there's that release, that discharge, all that stuff
Yeah.
that's helpful, but that's one way. And it's not the only way that's going to help you with the kind of anger that you may get when you're dropping your kids off, right? So I think that's the other thing, because I've seen some, the addictions start to come in,
Sure.
where people can get addicted to drugs, alcohol, porn, whatever it is. And then you have another trajectory in your life that is causing you not to be in your best self.
Well, and I just want to hone in on this because I think it is important because I think, when you look at the male suicide numbers, it's 105 every day in America. The last I looked, it was 38 of those were divorced men. I don't know the nuance to the data, whether they were divorced 5 minutes or 25 years or whatever. But I think there is absolutely a tendency for men not being allowed, certainly being conditioned to not feel their feelings, but anger we can, right? That's one. Lust a little bit, and like joy over sports teams or whatever, which sadly my Steelers lost yesterday. But
I know,
anyway,
I'm so sorry about that.
it happens.
Yeah,
Um,
I
unfortunately, it's happened a lot under my time
yeah.
in the playoffs over the last, I
I
don't
have
know,
a good
what.
friend that was very depressed yesterday because of the Eagles. So,
Ah, yeah, yeah.
you
Well,
know,
yeah, we have a
yeah,
lot of that around here too.
yes.
Um, but I think I just want to make sure we're so I feel like I need to emphasize this because I do feel like I do see a lot of men lean on their anger, and I think it's because they're avoiding the feelings and the emotions. I say all the time, we do have tear ducts, fellas. Like they're there. It's not like it's a rare thing. They're in this model. And so isn't I just maybe I'm off here, but I feel like I really want to emphasize that I think it's important that these guys that are angry not only exhaust their anger in a way, but get to the core and the root. What I feel is the core and the root isn't, and that is hurt. Am I wrong?
Yeah, I know you're not wrong, but I think what it is that the anger becomes like your armor,
Sure.
right? Because if you decide to, let's say, I'm going to get real and I'm going to talk about how hurt I am, which is not common for them to express,
Yes.
and if they let that armor down, then will they experience more hurt? You
Mm,
see what I'm saying? And so it's almost like, it's not easy to heal.
yeah.
And it
Oh
takes
no.
energy and support and oftentimes love. I mean, I know we haven't really talked about love, but and that's where those relationships come in again. But I think it's important for people to understand that anger is an emotion. But if that's the only way that they're expressing the breakup,
Yeah.
and they're not willing to go and, talk about the hurt or the grief of the loss, then they're going to be stuck in this anger mode
Yeah.
that's not gonna benefit them, their children, or their present moment or their future relationships. If you can't release it somehow, and that's why, sometimes I guess what I want to say to you too, which I know this, and here I'm an old trauma therapist, you're gonna not believe what I'm gonna say. Sometimes I've found that people may not want to talk about whatever the trauma is.
Sure.
Now, as an old trauma therapist, I said, well, if you don't talk about it, you're never going to heal. I have learned that's not the case.
Okay, so
Learn-
yeah, okay. Sorry,
Okay, that for
that's what I was trying to get to. Is like,
okay, yes.
yeah,
For
do you have
some
to
people,
experience that pain?
for some people, it's enough to learn to regulate your nervous system. That when you're feeling those sensations connected to your anger, hot ears, oh, my hands are like this. Wait a second, what else can I do? Oh, my feet feel better. Oh my gosh, when I think about that beautiful sunset, my body cools down. So what happens when you do that? You are dealing with the anger, but from the body being the source
Mhm.
rather than the feelings being the source. But what happens with that, which is quite a miraculous thing, the way we're designed, is that oftentimes when we do that, there can be greater acknowledgement that there is a feeling because the armor is getting destructed by bringing sensations about wellness into the present moment. Do you get
Oh,
that? It's
yeah,
really an important thing to get.
that's fascinating. All right,
It's fascinating.
repeat
It's
that one more
fascinating.
time because I really want to lock that in.
So think about the sensation, the three doorways:
Yep,
feelings, thinking, sensation.
yep,
So when we decide, when let's say we're so angry, but we don't want to feel, we don't want to talk about feelings,
yep,
and we don't want to talk about a cognitive reframe,
yep.
but we say, okay, what's happening in my body when I get angry?
Hmm.
I have hot ears, my hands go into a fist,
Yep,
my body's tight.
yep.
How can we shift that body tension and bring more well-being into your body, which causes you to access your parasympathetic nervous system, which is for rest and digest? Oh, I'm going to push against the wall. That helps that energy leave. I'm going to think about how much I love skiing in the winter. I'm going to think about a time, and this is also interesting. I'm going to think about a time that's cooler than this moment
Mm.
because I am so hot right now. Oh, that time I went for that walk in the snow, blah, blah, blah.
All right.
Because if we can imagine it, we can sense something differently.
Yeah.
So then the heat subsides, the tension leaves. And instead of being angry, we're going, oh, okay. Yeah. And maybe even some sadness. But the other thing that happens, we haven't talked about this, and this has been so interesting for me to see this, is there's this emergence of self-compassion.
Hmm.
Because ultimately, many of us women, female, trans, middle, whatever,
Right.
when we have that degree of anger, we have no self-compassion.
Hmm.
But when we have the emergence of self-compassion, we have more compassion for others. Even an ex-wife, oh, I get it. Yeah, I remember what happened to her when she was a kid. This makes sense now.
Yeah.
You have a larger picture.
Yeah.
It's like instead of the lens being here, the lens is wider. I read something from Desmond Tutu that was so beautiful. And he talked about, well, I guess I don't know if he saw the interview or he talked to someone who'd been an astronaut.
Hmm.
And the astronaut told him that once he saw the Earth from space, he no longer thought about how we are individuals, but how we are humanity. And I know this is kind of maybe a broader subject,
Right.
but I think this is what happens when we sense our humanity by even sensing how we can come into a space of well-being. It opens up the blood flow to the prefrontal cortex. That expansion allows self-compassion to come in,
Hmm.
and that self-compassion leads to compassion for others. It's really
Yeah.
quite remarkable the way we're designed. And I guess I've seen it so many times. We have a group of people in the model that I've created that are working in Rwanda, working with genocide perpetrators
Wow.
and finding that they can actually help people who've done the most heinous acts with anger and rage to find self-compassion to build a new present
Hmm.
and future. They've already spent time in prison. But isn't that what we're called to do? Otherwise, we create a prison in ourselves. We don't have to be locked up to create that prison for ourselves of anger and rage.
Yeah, that's profound stuff. I think, it's kind of around sort of the topic of forgiveness and, having compassion for the other. I think that is an important component. I know that for me, it took me a long time to even want to hear something like that, let alone like sort of try and tiptoe towards it. But I do think that that is an important part because I think he can't hold on to it. Number one, I think in some kind of, well, you kind of described it. I feel like I didn't know this, by description, but like I kind of feel like the more I can kind of forgive her, the more I can kind of forgive myself because even though like I was angry and she left and she's the one who ended and everything, there's also still a part of me that's mad at myself for it happening because I was not perfect. I made many, many, many mistakes. We'd be here
Yeah.
till tomorrow if I listed them all out.
Well, I think if you show me a perfect person, maybe you have to show me a graveyard that exists in the living. But you know what? Can I
Very
ask
true.
you a question that when
Sure.
you said, do you have more forgiveness for yourself right now in this moment?
Um. Ooh. Um. I don't know. I would say more than I did 4 years ago, for sure.
So let me ask you this. When you say more than you did 4 years ago, this is a funny question. This is about your sensations again.
Sure.
Where does that land in your body? More, it doesn't have to be perfect. Remember, more than I
Uh,
used to. Where do you notice inside your body when you say, okay, I have more than, is it in your face? Is it in your heart? Is it in your arms, your legs? Where is that more than I used to?
I think it's a I hate to feel like I'm cheating, but I think it's a general overall lighterness, if that makes any kind of
Oh,
sense.
no, it totally does. So I hear that a lot. So can I just invite you for just a moment?
Sure.
This is what I'm talking about. Can you notice the overall, even a little bit, the lightness?
Sure. Oh
Notice
yeah.
that shift. So can you savor it for just a moment? Just notice it
Sure.
for a few minutes.
Sure.
Notice that lightness for a few moments and see if anything else happens as you notice the lightness.
I think in a weird way there is a sense of pride because I did so much work to get to this point. Like I golly, you talk about, this stuff isn't easy. I am well aware that it is
Well,
not easy.
so
It is
when you
really
say,
hard.
I'm going to ask you one more question because this is
Sure.
important. You said you just had a meaning, which is pride.
Sure.
So this is the next question. Can you notice where the pride lands inside?
Oh, my chest for sure. Yeah.
Can you sense it? Oh, and did you notice this right here? So
Oh
that's the other
yeah.
thing you mentioned. I know as we're getting close to end.
Sure.
Can I invite you just to notice your hand to your chest?
Sure.
And so when you do that, what else do you notice? Oh, did you notice you just took a deep breath?
I did, yeah.
You did. That's the autonomic nervous system that you're parasympathetic. So this is why all the things I'm talking about are important.
Yeah.
I
Agreed.
didn't mention gestures, which are underneath conscious awareness, but I have to say it's so beautiful to see you do this. I've seen it all over the world when people talk about something that's meaningful to them, that they'll put their, and so that I like to catch it. Because when you catch it, right,
Mm.
look at your smiling right now, is that it actually, it's like that tuning your well-being. And so that's what I would, suggest to everyone to try to catch it, catch it and notice it. The lightness when it happens, it's not always there, but when it is, it's kind of like the cream rises to the top,
Mm.
that you could feel a little bit more of the forgiveness and then it was pride. And that is recognizing how hard you've worked, even including having this podcast where you're helping so many other people. Goodness gracious. 7,000 people, guys on your Facebook support group. I'm impressed.
Thank you. Yeah, well, I was not in a good place when it initially happened, and we'll get to the last question here after my little explanation, but as to sort of why I'm doing this or whatever. And I don't know why I need to explain it, but I guess sometimes I worry about people's thoughts about my motivations. And the bottom line is I was suicidal. And I had a man who was a friend of a friend. I'd known him well. We'd hung out, but he wasn't my best friend. But he had been through it, and he was the light in my darkness. And if it wasn't for him, I don't know. I
Mm.
probably wouldn't have because of my children. But man, I was in a very low place, and I didn't have anyone to really go to. I mean, I had other friends, but if you've never been through it, you don't get it. It just, at least in terms of the divorce, because it's not just, and I'm sure other traumas are significant too. I'm not trying to downplay those, but it is all encompassing. It is everything. It is your identity. It is your life, your living conditions in terms of who lives with you. It is your financials. It is friendships. It is your social events. I mean, it is everything. And he was that light in the darkness. And once I got to a little bit better place, I went through a self-help program. And one of the things, at the end of that was like, okay, now what? What are you going to do? What is a goal? And I just thought, I'm going to try and help as many men as I can, because if it wasn't for Chris, I don't know that I'd be here. And I want to try and be Chris to as many people as I possibly can. So that's why I do what I do. That's why I talk about where I'm at and my feelings and what I'm going through. And just in the hopes that I can provide that light in someone else's darkness. So thank you for saying that. It does mean a lot. I'm not the best at receiving. I'm getting better, I feel like,
Okay. Well, and the thing about it, but I won't do it, but I really, maybe after the show's over, is that really notice what it's like inside your body to be able to admit that and to say it out loud. That's really what life is about.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much for doing this. Before we get to the last question, I want to ask you, where can people find you? What's the best way to reach you? I know you
Okay,
mentioned some
so
things before, but let's cover them
yeah,
all.
they can reach me at elaine@resiliencywithin.com. That's my my other, I have many different emails, but that's the one for my consultation business and for my
Gotcha.
talk show.
Gotcha.
And that's where people can reach me. And they can find my book, Building Resiliency to Trauma, on Amazon. Make sure they get the second edition that came out in March of 2023. And that talks about a lot of the things that we've been talking about. And even though some of it's written for therapists, but a lot of it's written for laypersons.
Sure.
So you don't have to be a therapist to get something out of it.
Awesome. Well, I'm gonna order one. I can tell you that. So the last question that I ask everyone is, what words of wisdom would you impart to a man who is just beginning his divorce journey?
Be gentle with yourself. And reach out, like you talked about that one friend. It's kind of what we said in the very beginning.
Yeah.
Is try to find that one friend, that one person, so that you have an anchor. But be gentle with yourself. It takes time.
It does. Thank you so much for coming on and giving me so much of your time and your wisdom. I really, truly appreciate it. Thank you.
Well, you are very welcome. So it's really was fun. I mean, I know that fun's kind of a weird word to say. We're talking about all these deep things, but I think it's important that we share these things that can help people. And I know that that's one of your dedications. So
Absolutely.
thank you.
Yes. Thank you. Thank you so much for watching and/or listening. Since my separation in July of 2019, I have done an incredible amount of work on myself. I've had many different therapists, life coaches, and went through different programs. I've taken all that I've learned and put it into my own program called Forged by Fire. If you are interested in having me help you navigate your divorce, please hit my website, risingphoenixdivorcecoach.com. I look forward to working with you.